Welcome everyone, my name is Zach, and I recently completed a winter road trip that was a total of 3,800 miles in my Tesla Model 3. So today I'm going to be talking about what that was like, including the accuracy of my planning, the issues I encountered along the way, and the tips I have for you if you're planning a similar road trip. I'm going to go get on my computer so I can walk through the details.
So I actually planned this trip using a better route planner instead of the built-in Tesla navigation system, and I made a video explaining how to use this tool last month. I don't really recommend using the built-in Tesla navigation system because it really just doesn't give you many options. So if you've used a better route planner or watched that video of mine, you'll know how I ended up with these spreadsheets with my trip plans. And I really just went through and added my actual results during the road trip. And then I calculated a few things just to better demonstrate how accurate the planning was. So this sheet right here is for the outbound trip, and you can see that this is a total of 1,871 miles. And there are a total of 17 charging stops along the way. So the blue columns were from a better route planner, and these were really the predicted values, and the orange columns were my actual results. For example, in Davenport, Iowa, I was predicted to arrive with 12% battery, and I actually arrived with 11% battery. And then as far as the departure state of charge, this is what the route planner was saying that I should charge up to in order to get to the next charging stop. And you can see that in a lot of cases I charged up a little more just to be safe. And then there were some other cases where I got distracted by talking to people at the charging stops, and I ended up charging up way more than I was supposed to. For example, here in Davenport, I was supposed to leave with 59%, and I actually stayed there until I had 88% battery. So in order to better represent this, I added a few columns over here. So this blue one here for planned usage, this is really just how much battery I was expected to use between the two locations. So for example, I planned to leave with 98% battery, and then I was projected to arrive at the first charging stop with 50% battery, meaning that that was 48% battery that was going to be used between those two locations. And then the column just right of that is what my actual results were. So in this case, I was predicted to use 48%, and I really only used 42%, meaning that I actually used 6% less than I was expected to. And as you can see here throughout this column, for the most part, my planning was actually a little conservative, meaning that I used less energy than I was expected to. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I think the opposite case would have been much worse, showing up to chargers with less than I was supposed to, especially since I've been planning to arrive with about 12% battery. But as you can see, for the most part, it was actually pretty close. So I did this drive over 2 days with a stop in Michigan City where I actually slept in my car at a supercharger. And you can see that during the day, when it was a little warmer outside, my efficiency was better than expected. But then when it got colder at night, the route planner was much more accurate. Or in a few cases, you can actually see how my results were worse than expected. And these tended to be when it was colder and windier outside. But overall, I was a little conservative with my planning, and most times I arrived at chargers with more charge than I was supposed to. And this actually helped to offset one area that a better route planner isn't that great, and that's the estimated charging time. What the route planner tells you seems to be based on ideal conditions and doesn't take into account any battery degradation or weather-related impacts. I would say on average, my stops would probably have taken about 5 minutes longer than what a better route planner predicted here. But like I said, because I was more efficient than anticipated while driving, I didn't actually have to charge up as much in terms of percentage as planned, so I think it came out pretty even in the end. So overall on the outbound trip, a better route planner predicted that I would use about 337 watt-hours per mile. And in reality, I only used 323 watt-hours per mile, which over 1,871 miles comes out to about 26.2 kilowatt-hours of difference, which at around only 35% of the battery pack is really accurate. So if we look at the same information for the return trip, you'll see that in this case, it was actually really accurate. Again, there were some variations based on the outside temperature and some other variables, but you can see here that the planned efficiency going back was 340 watt-hours per mile, and my actual results were 339, which is insanely close, and within 2 kilowatt-hours over 1,877 miles, which is just insane. But as you can see, going back this way, there were a couple of times that I arrived with about 9% battery. And I think if you've never done a road trip like this in an electric car before, you're probably going to be pretty anxious arriving with such a low state of charge. So I think the key to a road trip like this is to keep watching the data that the car tells you and see how it's trending, and then adjust if needed. You can see in the time lapse that I shot on the return trip that I keep checking the energy graphs in the car to see how each leg is going. Basically, I check what I'm supposed to arrive at the next charger with in terms of battery percentage, and then keep checking to make sure I'm on track. If you get a strong headwind or super cold temperatures, it can make a big difference in your energy usage. And if you notice that things are not looking good and you're going to be arriving with, say, less than 5% battery, there are a couple things you can do. First up is slow down. This will probably make the biggest difference, and you should be able to see the data trending in a better way very quickly. And then you can also turn down the cabin heat to conserve energy. I find that the graphs that show your recent energy usage are extremely helpful because you can see your predicted range based on the last 5, 15, or 30 miles. And I constantly flip through these 3 graphs and compare. If they all say I can go 100 more miles based on my recent usage, and I have 75 miles to go to the next charger, then I'm going to feel pretty comfortable. But if I have 75 miles to go, and these graphs are saying that based on my recent usage, I only have 78 miles of range left, then I think it's time to slow down. And for anyone that doesn't know, I was doing this road trip in a 2019 Tesla Model 3 long-range dual motor, which has an EPA rated range of 310 miles. And throughout the road trip, I kind of realized that there was a pretty easy way to figure out how much range I actually had left. And again, this is assuming pretty fast highway speeds and winter, which both do not do great things for the range of your electric vehicle. But anyway, I was getting about 2 miles per 1% battery, meaning that I'd only get about 200 miles of range on a full charge. I think in reality it was probably closer to 215, but close enough. And again, I think this is somewhat expected. I mean, we're talking about highway speeds in the cold. So even though it may sound pretty bad, 210, 215 miles versus 310, I think it's still a pretty practical amount of range, especially in a pretty worst case scenario like this. And as far as autopilot versus full self-driving on a trip like this, I personally think that just having autopilot is totally fine. Really, the only difference is going to be automatic lane changes, which, don't get me wrong, would have been nice, but is that worth $10,000? I don't think so. Not for me, at least. One thing that I did try on this trip for the first time was sleeping in my car, which honestly wasn't the best experience. And that's mostly because I just wasn't very comfortable because I'm not used to sleeping in my car. But being able to leave the climate control on was amazing. And I was plenty warm even though it was below freezing outside. And really the only negative thing that I have to say about the car over this 3,800 mile road trip was the phantom braking. This actually happened a few times throughout the trip, and it really caught me off guard. Now I've had it happen before, but it's honestly been a while. And if you don't know what phantom braking is, it's essentially when autopilot thinks that it sees something coming up in the road ahead of you, so it slams on the brakes, but there's really nothing there. I find that most of the time this happens near a bridge or an overpass where there's a dark shadow on the road that autopilot interprets as something stopped in the road. And it's only a few frames here in this time lapse, but you can see that I'm cruising along and then very quickly start decelerating, which is scary by itself in the Tesla, but it also makes me even more nervous if there's a car behind me who probably isn't expecting me to be slamming on my brakes at highway speeds. And I've had this happen before, so I knew what this was and how to handle it. But honestly, if this happens to someone that isn't so aware of Tesla and all the ins and outs, I think they would probably be terrified and likely hesitant to use autopilot in the future. Now, as far as some quick trip highlights and stats here, it was a total of 3,748 miles, and my planned efficiency while using a better route planner was 338.5 watt-hours per mile, and my actual efficiency was 331 watt-hours per mile, and that was over the entire 3,748 miles. And I used a total of 1,260 kilowatt hours of electricity. And throughout the trip, I made 32 charging stops in 8 different states. And my total time of driving and charging was 64 hours spent over 4 days, with 10 hours of that being spent charging. And if you divide the miles by the total time, you'll see that I actually averaged about 59 miles per hour throughout the entire trip, including charging stops. And for people that think that a road trip like this in an electric vehicle is just impractical because you're going to spend all of this time charging, it really only added about 18% more time to the trip. And if you were doing a similar road trip in a gas car, it's not like you don't have to stop every once in a while either. So I found that for myself, a good rule of thumb is that an electric car road trip is going to take about 10% longer than it would in a gas car. And in the scheme of things, that's really not that much. But overall, it was a pretty successful road trip, and my planning was pretty accurate, so I definitely do recommend that you use a better route planner instead of the built-in Tesla navigation system. I definitely met a few people at superchargers that were asking how I planned my road trips because they were having serious issues with the Tesla planner and showing up at each charger with just a few % battery left. But let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions or comments related to the road trip, and make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. But regardless, thanks for watching and see you next time.